Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple, the show where we talk about all things board game related. Today we're bringing you a Kickstarter preview. This is for a game based on a 1842 short story by Edgar Allan Poe called Masque of the Red Death.
Yeah, and when he says it's tied to that story, it's surprisingly tied to that story.
Yeah.
We knew that it was based on an Edgar Allan Poe story, but we weren't familiar with that story. So we looked it up, and after playing the game, it's amazing how closely tied to it is, down to the colors of the rooms on the board and things like that. It's pretty cool.
So it is a 4 to 7 player game that takes place in two very distinct phases. The story itself revolves around a prince whose land has been plagued by the Red Death. And what he's done is he's sequestered himself and all of his noble friends within an abbey. And this abbey has 7 colored rooms. And through the course of the night, they are trying to gain prosperity. But little did they know, once the clock struck midnight, they would be visited by the Red Death himself.
Exactly, and that's sort of the second phase of the game. Happens in sort of a very short time span where you're actually doing a little bit of programming behind a player shield to sort of move your pawn around this board, hoping that you know where the Masque of the Red Death is not going to be, so that you can avoid him for that last period of the game.
So let's talk about all the components first, then we'll talk about the phases of the game. You have the abbey itself. As we said, this abbey is broken into 7 very different colored rooms. Each of these rooms has a symbol on them that will be important when you're actually looking at cards and different components within the game. Each player is going to have a standee that represents their particular character that they're playing. Their character will have a player shield, and behind their player shield, they're going to have a player board. This is going to be their programming board once the clock strikes midnight. So they're going to be taking all their movements behind here so other players can't see. Also, you're going to have a track around the outside edge of the board. This is the prosperity. You're trying to gain victory points through the course of the game. But you can die and lose everything.
Yeah, the game is not just about who can score the highest, it's who can score the highest and survive in the end, because you could be down, you could be in last place, and at the end, if you're the only person who is able to avoid the Red Death, you're the winner, maybe with 3 points.
You also have a prince board. This is going to denote where the prince is going to move every 20 minutes. There are 12 phases in the first portion of the game. Each of those phases, the prince is going to move to a different area, allowing players to gain prosperity from the same area as him. And then you're going to have a bunch of gossip cards. These are the locations that are at the bottom of the board. They represent the 6 turns once the clock strikes midnight. These are the locations that the Red Death will be. They're in secret. No one knows what these cards are, but they have an idea of what they could be. Each of these stacks is a different time. You have 12 through 1250, and then each of these cards could represent one of the 7 different rooms in here.
Exactly. At the very beginning of the game, you're going to take all of those gossip cards and deal 2 out to each of those spaces. The rest of the gossip cards are going to make a stack. That's where you're going to be getting your information throughout the game. So sort of trying to deduce and rule out where the Red Death won't be.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of methods that we'll get to in a second about how you can sort of steal those cards from other players, peek at some of those cards, things like that.
Now, the whole game is powered by action cards. Every player is going to start with the same 9 action cards. These cards allow you to do different things upon the abbey itself. Plus, each player is going to randomly draw from 10 cards a personality. This is a different variable player power that each player can use through the course of the game. As I said, the first part of the game, it's called Playing the Masquerade. It takes place over 12 rounds. Each of these rounds, you're playing one of those 9 cards. Well, how does that work? Well, some of the cards will bounce back in your hands. Some of the cards, once you use them, they're out for the game.
Right. Most of them will be out for the game unless there's 2 cards, actually, that can come back in your hand after you've played them. The rest will stay out. There are some personality cards, that special unique ability. Some of those will allow you to scoop all of your cards back up, but that is very rare.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the actual first part of the gameplay. Again, this is called Playing the Masquerade. Most of this is done at the same time. Simultaneously, the first thing that happens is every player who's in the same spot as the prince that starts the round is going to gain 1 prosperity. So you're trying to position yourself in a way that can get you in that same area. but you're also not wanting to be in the same area as some players because there's a heavy amount of player interaction where you can, as David said, you can steal some of those cards, you can look at their cards, you can mess with their prosperity and their victory points. So you're positioning yourself round after round to try to get points or to avoid interaction.
Yeah, this is definitely a game about not only surviving, but surviving your opponents as well, because like Jeremy said, they're going to be stealing cards, taking points even away from you if you're in the same spot. So that's just a decision you're going to have to make. And then as it gets closer to midnight, you also want to take into consideration where you need to position yourself to sort of start your dance with the Masque of the Red Death.
Once phase 1 ends, that's called the Prince Rewards, and you go into part 2, that's when each of the nobles get to mingle with one another. Each player simultaneously is going to pick one of their available cards from their hand, and they're going to hold it in their hand face down. Once everyone has chosen a card, they all reveal it at the same time. Starting with the player who is furthest back on the prosperity track, in turn order, each player is going to enact that specific action card. These action cards do a variety of different things. Most of these cards allow you to gain prosperity. They allow you to have a couple an extra movement within the board. They also allow you to peer into this gossip deck to grab a card into your hand that basically is going to allow you in the second phase of the game to know where the Red Death is not going to be.
Right. It takes some getting used to figure out what you're trying to figure out here. Like Jeremy said, some of the cards in here are going to let you interact with that gossip deck. Some of them are going to let you take a look at gossip cards that other players have. The discuss card is one of the cards that's going to be used a lot. People play this. This is one of those 2 cards that will bounce back into your hand after the round. But this one allows you to just take the top card off of that gossip deck, and you're going to be able to keep that for the rest of the game unless someone else takes it from you.
A lot of the cards will have this icon on it that denotes that you have to be in a location with another player in order to take those abilities. Those abilities typically allow you to peer into the hands of other players, to see the gossip cards that they've collected, or to actually physically steal those cards from their hand. This is where the memory portion comes in.
Yeah.
You're going to be gathering a lot of these gossip cards through the course of the game. You have to remember these cards. These cards tell you very specifically at a very specific time where the Red Death is not going to be. And there's 7 different possibilities for each of the different time frames.
And there are also gossip cards that are what they call rumors. And these are not times and room colors, but instead options to maybe even look at some of the gossip cards that are here at the bottom of the board.
For a specific time,
so
too,
you can very specifically find out not where he's not going to be, but where he's going to be, which lets you know, okay, I just don't need to be there. But again, there's 2 cards there in each spot. So at the end of the game, you're not likely going to find out all of the information you need to know, but you're going to get a little bit of information to help you stay safe.
The gossip deck itself is going to have all of the cards that weren't placed down here into the bottom of the board. What that means is that, as we said, each of these time frames has 7 cards that could be associated with it, meaning each of the 7 different rooms. When you look at these cards, it's going to tell you at 1250 exactly which room he's going to be in. There's 2 of these, meaning that there's 5 other cards from 1250 in here that aren't in there. These will be also mixed with those rumor cards, which mean that when you draw these cards from things like Discuss, they're going to allow you to get a physical representation of where that Red Death is going to be or not going to be at the end phase of the game.
Right, and the other thing that's going to happen largely in the Masquerade phase of the game is, like Jeremy said earlier, you can take cards, you can peek at cards of other players, but you can also, as we said, take points from other players. Again, that has to take place if you're in the same room with those players. There are cards that allow you to get 3 points, but maybe give another player 3 points. Or the opposite. You take some points, they lose some points, things like that. So you have to basically jockey yourself around this board to do what you're wanting to do with the cards that you have left, because there's going to be a lot of looking around the table to see what cards people have played, so that they know if they're safe or not.
One thing we should say about the prosperity track, anytime you gain prosperity, you're always going to leapfrog over other players in front of you. No players can occupy the same number. So once all players have played their action cards, then you're going to go into the third thing that happens. That's when each player gets to move their noble 1 space to an adjacent location. They don't have to, they can stay in the same location, but the Prince board over here is going to tell you where he is going to be moving each of the new rounds within the 12 rounds in the first start of the game.
Right, and the prince moves wherever he wants to.
Yes.
He's not moving one space at a time. It just shows the room he's going to be in. So if you're going to miss out on a point with the prince at the beginning of round 2, you might be able to set yourself up to be in the same room with him in round 3 or maybe round 4.
The prince will then move, and then finally you're going to advance on the clock here to the next time frame. You're going to do that 12 times. At the end of the 12 rounds, each of the players is going to program their board. Now, I'm going to move the shield aside. I'm going to pull up my program board. On here, you have 6 different time frames. These 6 time frames also mirror the bottom of the board. At any time during the whole first round of the game, or the first phase of the game, you're allowed to take these tokens, and they're double-sided, showing clockwise or counterclockwise, and put them on any of the 6 different areas. This is going to tell you, or you don't have to put any on there at all.
Right.
You can just make your guy stay. This is going to tell you at that specific time which adjacent location you could possibly be moving your character. Why do you want to do this? Because in your mind, you're already going to know where the Red Death is going to be and not going to be. So you're trying to make sure that in each of these time frames, your character is in a room where the Masque of the Red Death isn't going to appear.
Yeah, and it sounds more complicated than it is for sure, but just to give you an example, if you've determined through the first part of the game that at 12 midnight, the Masque of the Red Death is not going to be in the yellow room, before the last phase starts, you either want to find your way to that yellow room, or if you're in this light blue room or this green room, you could use one of those tokens to move either clockwise or counterclockwise to get into that yellow room right before that phase starts.
So once each player enacts their first movement, it's either staying, moving clockwise or counterclockwise, all players will do that simultaneously. They're going to reveal out of their player shields their movements, and then the Masque has 2 chances each of these rounds to kill people. So you're going to flip over those 2 cards and see the time frame that he is going to basically kill players. And once you flip these over, they're going to tell you exactly the rooms he's going to move to and who he's going to kill. So you have at 12 o'clock, he's going to move to the red room. No one's in there. And then you're going to move to the green room. No one's in there. So everyone is programmed properly. At the end of that time frame, he's going to move back into the center. Each player is going to look at their next time frame, move them or keep them where they are according to what they've placed on the board, and then do it again. You're going to do this 6 times. So the Red Death has 12 different times that he could possibly kill the players.
Right, and like I said earlier, you're never going to be able to find out every single round. I can't imagine that happening, but if you can get enough information to where you're safe, for instance, for 3 of the 6 rounds, and then just cross your fingers and hope that while moving to the next room where you know there's safety, that you're not going to get caught. That's where a lot of the excitement in this game really comes out.
Yeah, so when you first play this game, your inevitable way that you want to play this game is you want to get the most prosperity than anyone, because it feels like you're trying to earn victory points. The player who has the most prosperity, and if they survive, they win the game. If you are killed by the Masque of the Red Death, you're just out permanently. But there's also the idea that you're going to be using your cards to figure out what other players have seen and which cards are down here. So there's that dual purpose throughout the course of the game on how you want to enact each of the 12 rounds leading up to the Masque of the Red Death.
Yeah, there is definitely a balance between points and information. So usually, if you're going to have a lot of points, you're going to have less information. When we've played this game, some players had a ton of information, but practically no points. So they had to bank on the fact that they were going to be the only ones to survive. So it is definitely a balancing act. I don't think I would recommend doing one heavy over the other. You need to do a little bit of both if you can.
And although most of the gameplay elements come from the first phase of the game, the excitement in the second phase is really cool.
Yes.
Like once you start flipping those cards over, there is a tension there on being like, wait, everyone's moving over there, but I'm still here. This can't be good for me.
Yes, it allows you to feel smart from one card to dumb to the next card, because you might have had enough information at 12:10, but you might have had no information at 12:20. So it really is exciting because it makes you feel successful and then also holding your breath.
Yeah, absolutely. So guys, this one's called Masque of the Red Death. It is a 4 to 7 player game. Takes about 60 minutes to play. If you guys have any questions about the game, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and everything else that we do. And we'll catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.